Pledge of allegiance.
All right.
Nope.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Hey, tonight we got Dino, state district what? Oops.
District 5,
District
Wakefield,
5.
Brookfield, Effingham.
Okay.
Yep.
Can we open with a prayer?
Sure. Yeah, Ken, if you'd like.
Father, we come before you tonight as concerned citizens about our town, which I know that you are in favor of. I thank you for the blessings that we have experienced of liberty and freedom, and we want to keep it that way. Please help us, and that this meeting will be a good meeting that will uplift all of us in our community. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Good. Nice job.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I didn't even consider it. It's my failure.
Thank you, Ralph.
So tonight we got Dino straight from east side.
Yep.
All the way from the big town of downtown hysterical Wakefield. Dino, I know that there's some things happening in Concord, like the educational dispersal. I'm not sure what they call that bill.
Yep, CACR 12.
It's a bill pertaining to...
The ones that I thought would be good to talk about tonight are the ones that are directly going to affect us, and all with the exception of one are constitutional amendments that we as voters will be voting on in November. And each one needs to pass with 66% on the ballot, and then they will become law because they actually changed the Constitution. The one you're speaking of is CACR 12, which is the educational one. And the Committee of Conference, which I should say is when the House cannot agree entirely with the Senate, they form a Committee of Conference. And it's nothing that we vote on as individual representatives, but there's a committee that's formed together of state senators and state representatives, and they kind of hash out the bill. And if they do, then they bring it back to us, which I believe they're doing on Wednesday. They bring it back to us, and once they do that, they recommend whether to concur or not to concur with the conference. And everything we're going to talk about tonight, that the House has agreed with the Senate on some changes. So the bill in its original form has been changed with about 7 different points. When it comes right down to it, if we agree with it and it passes the House, it'll go past the Senate again. Then it goes before the voters of New Hampshire, which I suspect all of these will. Really, the highlights of CACR 12, which is the educational one that you've mentioned, I have some here that I just want to read off to you because it pertains to folks like Steve on the school board and us as citizens in Wakefield. First and foremost, it replaces the Claremont and Londonderry rulings that impose the highest level of judicial review on legislators' decisions for education policy. So those decisions we've been dealing with for 18, 19 years now in Claremont, it gets rid of those, and it's starting to put more power back at the local control level for the school boards. Although it doesn't go back to 100% what we did have, it allows local communities and school districts to adopt additional elementary and secondary standards and accountability standards that are not inconsistent with the state education policy. So the state has its base level of where they want to see the kids perform, and it gives back local control where we can amp that up a little bit, and we have a little bit more control over that, okay?
But they can't be below those standards.
That's right. They cannot be below the standards. Enables the state to target aid to communities that most need the support for public elementary and secondary education. So instead of the donor towns that we used to have, the state can kind of see on their radar towns that need a little more help. And if they have the money, and I'm sure they will, they'll be able to focus that money on these other towns.
When you say help, you're talking about
financially.
Okay, financially.
Financially.
Not the quality of education that the kids are getting.
Right.
Okay.
Right. allows the legislator to determine the amount of and the methods of raising and distributing state funding for public elementary and secondary education. As you remember with the Claremont issue, it was thrown to the judges, and the judges decided what an adequate education was, and they put a dollar amount on that. What this will do, if it passes, it puts it back to the legislative body, us folks down there in Concord, and it lets them determine how they're going to raise the money. It gives it a little bit more local control because you've got your state representatives and your state senators, whereas before it was the judges that were determining all that. This has already been signed off by the governor. He likes it, the Senate likes it, and the House likes it. It's still yet to be determined what's going to happen on Wednesday, but I have been getting phone calls already from House leadership saying, how are you going to go with this? For me, I'd rather have this 3/4 of a loaf of bread than stay where we are. Okay, this might not be 100% of where we want to be, but it's a lot better than the system that we have now.
So the donor system is what we're doing now, and that's where rich communities send more money to the state divvies it up to the poorer towns? Is that
Correct.
how it goes?
That's right. That's right. And this is, although it's not giving us back a complete 100%, I remember the days, as all of us do, where the school boards had a lot more local control. This gives back more local control, but it also divides a piece up to the legislative body as well. But the main thing is it overturns the Claremont and Londonderry decisions, and it gets the judges out of our education system, which I think is very important. Any questions on that? Because I was going to move to the next one. Questions? Steve, do you have any questions on that? You might know a little bit more about it than when it comes down the pike. I'm sure you'll get briefed.
Yeah.
That was CACR 12. CACR 6 is the. There's two really unique ones here. Well, I'll start with CACR 13. That is another constitutional amendment that will ban, in our Constitution, it will ban an income tax for the state of New Hampshire. Very, very unique. It's a neat tool to attract businesses and create jobs in our state. It does get some pushback on some people that say, well, if we don't have that, we don't have many options. If we need to raise revenue, if we're in a pinch, you know, people like to talk about sales taxes, income taxes. This would ban an income tax, so we would not have that as an option to come after the retired folks and their income, the working class, middle class, what have you. We wouldn't have that option to raise revenue. Yes?
How do we contact the folks in Concord to show support for a bill like, well, or no support for a bill like this?
Yep.
Are there numbers that you can give us later on in your talk
Sure.
here? I think it's important for the folks in Concord to understand how the constituents feel, and I don't know if maybe if you have a website and that contact information is already in there, or
The general court is the best way to go. It would be, I think it's General Court NH, and that'll pop up, and you just go to the House of Representatives and you click on Find a Rep. And when you do that, it'll show you the state of New Hampshire as a map. You click on your town, and it'll pop up your rep. Obviously, we know who yours are going to be, but it'll pop up your rep, and it'll give all the contact information for that rep. I put in my cell phone and an email address and all that. So that's the way they do it, and we get calls all the time. Each one of us represents approximately 3,200 people, and I always pride myself in saying I've probably talked to all of them because they do contact you. That's the beautiful thing about our system in New Hampshire. Although it's 400 members, it's very difficult to negotiate that sometimes through bills, but you do have a lot better access than any other state that I know of. So that's a good way to do that, good resource.
okay. And that was the CACR 13?
13, yeah.
Okay.
This one, CACR 6, another constitutional amendment that says if any new taxes or fees are to be raised on the taxpayers of New Hampshire, the ladies and gentlemen in Concord need to get a 3/5 majority. Right now it's just a majority vote, 51%. they would need to get a 3/5 majority in order to pass any new tax. So if they wanted to increase, let's say, the registration on the cars, they would have to have a 3/5 majority to do that. That would be in the Constitution. It's going to make it a little bit harder to increase taxes. And what that does is, if it's harder to increase taxes, then it really kind of puts them in a position where, well, let's really look at these numbers again. Let's really see if we really can or need to increase the budget by X, because they know on the other side of the scale they don't need 51% anymore. They need a much higher margin. We got pushback on that too, because they said, what about emergency situations? I believe, I haven't seen the final writing, but I believe there's emergency situations written into that. But again, it's not a loophole that could be used easily. So again, these 3 items will be coming to you in November. The one I'd also like to talk about is the voter ID bill, which I was involved in. I sit on election law. And just a sidebar on the educational one, CACR 12, Joe was involved with that. Joe's on education. So
He sits on the building committee or something like that?
he sits on the education committee. I don't know how far in detail he got with that constitutional amendment, but Joe would have a little bit more on that than I would. On the voter ID bill, this has been about a 3-year battle right now, and we finally got consensus with that committee of conference I was talking about with the Senate. We had a bill which I thought was crafted well, and it went into effect in September as kind of a precursor to the November election. And it was accepting all sorts of IDs, and including military passport, anything that was government issued, but it wasn't accepting student IDs. And the reason for that is a student ID can be had very, very easily. And the UNH department that issued those even suggested to us that they're too readily available. So they said they wouldn't really use them as an ID because they could be made up in somebody's dorm room, quite frankly. So the Senate didn't like that, and the Senate has included a student ID to be accepted for voting. They did a very unique thing here. They've got this creation where the Senate's bill lasts for a year, and then the bill that comes into effect, that stays into effect, is the House bill, which gets rid of the student ID. So it was kind of a compromise. Everybody got what they wanted for at least a temporary period. But what I like about it, we talk about half a loaf of bread compared to none. This at least gets us a voter ID bill in the state of New Hampshire. I can't tell you how many people come up to me, new voters, and they say, you don't need to see my ID? We say no, and we give them a ballot, and that's it. A lot of people talk about how there is no voter fraud, we can't determine it. I beg to differ. The way we determine voter fraud in this state is if there's somebody that's challenged as a voter, they fill out an affidavit saying they are who they say they are. That affidavit gets sent to the Attorney General. The Attorney General then mails it to ABC Main Street. And if the person's there and they receive their mail at ABC Main Street, they sign it and they send it back. If the person's not there, if the person was in fact fraudulent, and the person that really lives at that address that they gave sees it and throws it out, there's no tracking system. There's no way of finding that person. It gets thrown out and that's the end of it. So a lot of people say, well, we're not getting any of these back, so there must not be any voter fraud. The fact is there's no way of tracking it. When it gets thrown out, it's gone. So that vote is already cast. Go ahead.
Is it safe to assume that most voters have a driver's license or have a revoked driver's license?
It's very safe to assume that. The number that the DMV gave us was roughly, they do roughly 6,000 non-driver licenses, non-driver IDs a year, 6,000. And of those 6,000, which comes to a very small percentage, of that 6,000, there are people in there that have other forms of ID, but they just need a identification ID, you see?
A picture ID.
A picture ID, exactly. We got hit with the homeless person that sleeps under the bridge. We got hit with the elderly. We got hit with a lot of different things, and they kept on throwing this word disenfranchised. They think we're trying to disenfranchise people, when in fact what we're trying to do is protect everyone's vote that's in this room. Because if you don't show up at the polls one day and somebody knows you're not going to show and knows you didn't file an absentee, in a bigger city, we all know who you are. I don't think we could get away with that. But you could go in and just say your name, and in a bigger city, they would hand you a ballot. If I knew you were not going to vote and I knew your address, that's all it would take. Because you give the address and your name, they hand you a ballot. That's not protecting your vote, not at all. And I don't think it's cumbersome on people to produce an ID. I really don't.
I don't either.
Al?
What is,
How somebody that hasn't registered, they can register on voting day?
That's the unique thing, Al. On registration voting day, they can register on voting day, but they need an ID.
Well, I happen to be promoting Bill Denley when he ran over in Farmington. And in the morning, a half hour before the poll opened, there was I don't know how many here know Farmington that well, but from the town hall to Cumberland Farm store, there was a line all the way down there. You know what it was? Young children. To me, anyway. And they were going in and they were registering to vote. And I shouldn't bring this up, but that's how we got Obama. But never mind, forget that. I shouldn't bring that up, because I think everybody knows how I feel about that. But anyway,
Not hidden.
in the afternoon, during the day, I mean, it was all adults that came in there, was, you know, kind of scattered, not like it was in the morning. In the afternoon, about 3 or 3:30, the same thing, all the way to Cumberland Farm store. And the man that was helping me to campaign for Bill Denley, he and I looked around and I said, what is this? It was the same thing, all the way down. And then at about a half hour or 15 minutes before polls closed, I said to him, I said, here, I said, I'm going home. I said, this is not, it's going to close in 15 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever it was. And he says, hold my signs. He says, I want to run up there and see what's going on. He went up to the town hall, and all these young kids were going in there registering to vote. And I have no idea who the heck they were, and I don't know if they did. But to me, I do not feel that it is right that you have to wait till voting day to register. You have how many days or a year or whatever before that. If you're not registered to vote on voting day, then I don't feel you should be voting. That's my opinion. Doesn't amount to a hell of a lot.
Well, there's a trade-off there, though. On if we have voter registration on the same day as the voting,
Right.
that keeps us out of the motor voter law, which basically you can sign up to vote when you register your car. Those are the people that walk around, like the groups like Acorn, they go around and they get people to do absentee
Right.
just on the street. That keeps us out of that. So it's an either or. It's almost a lesser of the two evils. I don't particularly see an issue with registering on election day. I don't mind that, but here in New Hampshire, we have a lot of loopholes. You have to sign up. You can sign a piece of paper that says you're 18, that you live in the place that you're voting, and that you're a U.S. citizen. You can sign all these affidavits, and you'll get a ballot. And we all know that our ballots go in the machine, and they're kept hard copy, but we can't retract them, nor should we. But what happens then is these affidavits go, like I said, to the Attorney General. They get mailed, and if they don't get returned, we never know if there's a falsehood or not. So there is a loophole there. People will tell you that there's not an issue. I see it more as protecting everyone's right to vote and everyone's sanctity of everybody in this room, that you should be able to know that if you're out of town, if you're called out of town on an emergency or something like that, that somebody can't come in and say they're you and get away with it. Again, this is a small town. It's hard to say you're somebody because most of the clerks know everybody and all that. But these bigger cities and these bigger wards, I think it's happening.
You got a House bill number for that one that you're talking about, or is it?
I think it's 289, House Bill 289. It's getting beaten around quite a bit. I think the last I heard, the House bill that we had, the town clerks were not behind it, hoping that the Senate, when they kind of softened it, that the House clerks will get behind it, because they're a pretty strong force, and their argument, not the House clerks, but the argument on the other side of the aisle was, with all this new paperwork, there's going to be disenfranchising of voters because people will be such long lines and they'll go home and they won't want to deal with it. I contest in 2008, we had that Paul school jammed with voters because everybody wanted a certain candidate to win. And there were some people that probably turned away because of those lines. So you can't determine that it's going to disenfranchise anybody, because it could be, this election is going to be a very contested, hot election. So the lines will be long. One thing it did bring up, which I'm surprised survived, if you walk in with absolutely no ID and you want to vote, they're coming up with a system where they will actually take your photo. They'll take the photo, it goes into a computer for printing only. It gets printed out on your affidavit and it gets placed in the corner. Then the photo gets deleted right in front of you, so they won't have a track of it. But they will have a photo online and on file. So I was surprised that made it through, but it did through the Senate. So it's got every single avenue that they were saying that we were going to disenfranchise. It has solved that problem.
So with the instant picture, you can instantly vote. What if it turns out that picture, you're standing there and you aren't really from where you say you're from? I mean,
you've signed an affidavit for the penalty of some imprisonment and a $5,000 fine, and hopefully you've got the right address and and you can find these people. Yes.
I would not be in favor of this amendment, only because I see this leading to a national ID, and it sounds more like this eventually will move into that. And I see no protections in the amendment that this could be worked into a federal involvement of national ID. And how do you feel about that?
Well, I was going to actually talk to you about that after the meeting because of that ID thing. You're actually one of the people I thought about when I saw this in writing. I'm not for the ID bill that was defeated years ago. What, in 2005 maybe 2006? Definitely not for that. I have read the language in this bill that how they do get rid of the photo. It's not any advanced technology that's going to upload to anything else. It's just a quick photo and then it gets deleted. I might be a little more comfortable with that, but again, I want to see something get in place that maybe we can tweak later or maybe even abolish that. But I know what you're saying, and I'd rather see this than have nothing. Follow up.
So we lose our liberty incrementally.
Yes.
And in the beginning, it'll be an inconspicuous photograph that we're told is deleted, and then somehow, because the Patriot Act has completely dissolved our Fourth Amendment rights, at any point in time, the FBI will come in and they'll change that rule temporarily, and they'll use the information some other way. And I don't believe legislation is fast enough to respond to that. Thanks.
Excellent point. Yes.
Just to piggyback, my opinion on taking a photo and then printing it, I don't think we should get involved in that. I think if you're not responsible enough as an American citizen and you don't care about voting in this country, to at least go get some form of ID, and there's a whole litany of IDs you can go get, then maybe we don't want you voting anyways. And if you're the last minute person who has to say, well, I didn't bother to get some sort of ID, and we're going to take your temporary photo. If that's only there to placate the guy who's living under a bridge, well, sorry, get out from under the bridge and get an ID. But as far as a photo ID, I'm in favor as a photo ID because there is fraud, and at least if you've gone out and the government's not telling you which ID to get, so it's not going to lead to a national ID because I'm not in favor of that. But it's reasonable to ask a person to show who they are so that they can vote. I don't like the instant take a picture of the thing and vote either. But you have to have some responsibility to go get an ID.
What is it you're afraid of with the instant picture? I lost you there for a second.
Well, I'm not going to go as far as that. But the national ID concept is a concept whereby you standardize a bunch of criteria on an ID system, and then the database gets federalized. And so what happens is that every person is, for lack of a better term, numbered and accounted for. And then mandated. You know, if you want to have credit, if you want to have this, if you want to have that, well, you need your national ID. That's a bad place to go. But if you want to be a citizen, well, we all have to have ID. I mean, you can't get a credit card. You can't get, there's a ton of things you can't do with ID. And if you choose, so I'm not in favor of national ID, but I am in favor of verifying the voter. But I think it is a slippery slope when you start taking pictures of people. And you're only doing it, frankly, to take care of the person who's not responsible. And really, if you're not responsible, should you be voting in the first place?
I'll give you the quick history on the picture part of it. It wasn't part of the House. The Senate put it in on one of the bills that I helped draft, and we took it out. We, at that point, if a person came in and didn't have the ID, we had a provisional vote. They would take their ballot, they would still get the vote, and the vote would be cast and set aside. They had 2.5 days to come back and show an ID or get an ID. All these IDs that we're offering are absolutely free from the DMV, and the state would pick up the cost. That got shot down because it was unconstitutional, because here in the state of New Hampshire, everyone has the right to vote on that day. So if you're eligible to vote, which goes back to if you filled out all the correct paperwork, you're eligible to vote in New Hampshire. Now, what we're talking about here with this photo ID was placed in there so it would just be another plug in the dike, so to speak, because everyone kept coming up with all these reasons not to have a voter ID, and they're very extreme cases. I mean, the guy that lives under the bridge that wants to come and vote, very extreme cases. But so many people put in their own ideas to cover all their bases, and that's where we came up with this piece. So we're doing a photo ID. This is the sad part. We're doing a photo ID instantaneously on election day for maybe 0.2%, 0.3% of the people that will vote in the November election. It's a shame, but it is what it is. Yes?
Well, Ken Fifield was just saying, and go along with it, and also, when a police officer in town stops me or whoever, do they not take the license and the registration, and your picture is on it, and they get on there, they know more about me than I know about them. Is that not true?
That is true.
Well, so why would you need any more than that to prove that you are a U.S. citizen? If they want my passport, I can go get it in 15 minutes, and my birth certificate. I'm not going to get into what I'm almost getting into.
Don't get into the birth certificate out.
Forget it. Don't get me started.
Yes.
I've lived in a few states during the second 20 years of my life, and I've never been able to vote in those states. I've always filed absentee ballot because I was in the service. If some student comes in on a September, and they're allowed to vote on November, for somebody they have not a clue who they are. I think that's ludicrous.
I tell you what really solidified this, and maybe some of you have seen the video. It was it's called Project Veritas, and let's say, God forbid, you pass away before the election. Let's hope that doesn't happen, but let's say you do.
We need your vote.
We do need your vote. The process that we have isn't quick enough to catch up to to your death, so you're still on the rolls.
Yeah.
What this Project Veritas did, they were the same people that busted Acorn. They got a list of all the deceased people still on the rolls in New Hampshire. They went in and they said your name, you know, Mr. Peterson. They gave the address.
Right.
And